Welcome to this one-hour special call meeting of the Design Review Committee for discussion of the Franklin Grove Planned District Development Plan. This is a special call discussion centered on a preliminary Historic Zoning Commission recommendation request for a development plan proposal at the Franklin Grove. When a development plan application affects properties located within the Historic Preservation Overlay, the Historic Zoning Commission is asked to make a preliminary Historic Zone Commission recommendation. The goal is to ensure that considerations related to the Historic District Design Guidelines, specifically building location, building height, massing of buildings, setbacks of building from each other on the same site, from buildings on adjacent properties, from roadways, drive aisles, and parking areas, and locations of proposed parking and drive aisles. This preliminary historic zoning recommendation is important to assure the historic design guidelines can have an influence on major elements of the development. This DRC today will provide the applicant feedback related to those items I just mentioned, and is a step toward developing a formal recommendation to the Franklin Municipal Planning Commission and Board of Mayor and Aldermen. Another design review is scheduled now in October, including a site visit, and as of now, the Historic Zoning Commission will vote on a recommendation in November. For commissioners who were not here for two previous Historic Zoning Commission meetings concerning this site, and for those in the audience, a quick summary of the previous actions by the Historic Zoning Commission on this site. In June of 2019, approval was granted to demolish existing structures at 101, 103, and 105 Lewisburg. And approval as well was given to relocate the Rosenwald School to the site at a location to be determined based on rezoning, development plan, and site plan for the property. That approval has expired. In September 2020, approval was granted to temporarily relocate the schoolhouse to the site with a final location to be determined. Additionally, approval was given for a proposed partial demolition of a portion of the freestanding brick wall and stone wall. That approval has been extended through February of 2022. Having provided some background now, we're ready to hear from the applicant and welcome Mr. Stewart.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I'm Cyril Stewart. I live at 3813 Whitland Avenue in Nashville, but my heart lives down here in Franklin, and so I appreciate you being here to hear this today. I'm going to keep my remarks short. You got a staff recommendation package, and I will go through some of those slides and highlight some of the things, but you know, the big purpose for this is to hear your comments and for us to be able to hear your thoughts and reactions.
And Sarah, one other thing. We want to try to conclude everything about 3:50 today so we can reset for our 4 o'clock regular monthly design review meeting.
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. And so I'll go through these slides fairly quickly so that we can hear from you. And as the chairman said, we'll meet again next month on site, and we'll have additional information that you request for that meeting as well. So the slides that you will see, that's the cover slide. The next slide, it comes up, is the purpose and next steps. Now I will not read these slides to you. The one thing that I think is important on this one is the tentative schedule is the 3 o'clock site visit with the commission on October 18th. It's another DRC meeting, and then the November 8th actual meeting to make a recommendation on the site. So we will have opportunities to continue this discussion, which is really valuable for us. Next slide. It's a unique project for Franklin, and I think that one of the important things about this, and I've told the foundation on several occasions, if this were a commercial strip, if it was a single building, if it was a house or even a subdivision, the Franklin zoning ordinance would really tell us exactly what we need to do with it. But it's a unique site. It's been a campus for 40 years. It is still a campus. And so the way we've been working with the city on this is as a campus rather than an individual lot, like if you have a single home or a single business on one lot. So that looking at it as a campus is important to what we're doing. The next slide. This is an image showing the former O'Moore campus and what the buildings were like on that site. You can see the historic buildings, the blue buildings Two of those along Lewisburg at the bottom have been demolished, and then you can see the historic buildings there. The gray indicates where parking was located and drives on that site. Okay. Next slide.
Cyril, do you mind pointing out which building's which for the sake of everyone watching, please?
I'll be glad to. At the left of the screen going vertical is Margin Street. The main street's about 2 blocks over to the left off the screen. You can see the front lawn there in green. The former Winstead House is shown in the tan color or the golden color up at the top of the site. And you can see it's a pretty hefty footprint up there. On the balance of the top of the site and the right-hand side is parking, and of course a lawn in the back. What's not shown here that you'll see on subsequent slides is the tree. That oak tree is probably the most historic thing on the site as far as age. And then as you go down Lewisburg, which is diagonally on the left-hand side of the slide, you'll see the 2 buildings in blue that were demolished. That were later additions and not part of the historic structure. The Hayesbury House is the one that's right next to those, right next to that little blue square, and that again is another historic home that has now been restored and is being used for an entrepreneur center with a temporary permit there. The blue structure right behind that, that's right against the property line, is what they call the studio or pavilion. It's a small 1-story structure that's not historic, concrete block with drive-it on the outside of it, and that's currently in that site, and we plan on leaving it in that location, but changing the aesthetics of it to better match the site. What's that?
The smokehouse.
Oh, and then the smokehouse is actually located right behind Winstead, and that smokehouse is sitting on an exposed aggregate, pea gravel slab. So we suspect that it's been relocated. We have done some research. Rachel Finch is here, and she and Blake Windery and their team have done research on that building. We don't think it's anywhere close to the 1886 date that's shown on the sign that's hanging out there, but we plan on relocating that on the site to where it would be more of an accessory building to the other structures, closer to the Layhew building, and not right in the backyard of the Winstead, but with very little change to the exterior appearance of that.
How old do you think that is? If you don't think it's 1896, is that what you said? You don't think it's that?
No. Do you, Rachel, do you have a feel? How old is the smokehouse? I think at least 1913 is the furthest back they can take that. So
Okay.
could be older than that, but that's what they think.
In relation, what are the materials? Brick, clapboard, wood?
For
frame?
the smokehouse,
For the smokehouse?
it is a wood frame with lap siding.
Thank you.
And then the next slide that we have is actually the overall proposed site plan. And this site plan, again, margins on your left-hand side. Lewisburg is diagonally on the bottom of that slide. We are proposing to have an entrance off of Lewisburg, working with city engineering on that. And that is close to where an existing entrance is. And we have a full traffic study that we'll be working with the city on for that. That drive will come in and we'll have take you right to the center of the site with a roundabout there. It would be a 2-way in and out that would take you up to that site. And then we would use Ms. O'Moore's former apartment, which was more recently a cafe, as a visitor center that would allow people to come in and experience the site, buy tickets, and be oriented to the site, and either go to the front or rear gardens or other structures as appropriate. And as I mentioned, the first structure on the right is now called the Layhew Innovation Center. It is an entrepreneur center, a joint venture with Williamson Inc. To have 6 offices for growing businesses to move out of their garages and into this building before then moving to larger facilities. As you continue around the site, there's a one-way road that goes around the site. Toward the back of the site, the larger structure is the conservatory. Conservatory is a space that would be held for educational and other functions as you go around the site. It opens onto the oak garden, and you can see the big green circle in the middle of that backyard is the oak tree. Our arborist has estimated that's at least 150, if not 300 years old. And so the only way to find out for sure is to drill into it, and we don't want to do that. So, and then as you go around, the next structure right at the top toward the center is what we're calling a summer house. We earlier heard from the neighbors that they did not want any tenant events on site, and we committed to them to not have amplified music outdoors and to contain everything within a structure. So we put a smaller structure there for smaller events and for things like workshops, educational events, places for flower arranging and for artistic events. And then the Winstead House is right there in the center of the site. We are planning on, as you can see, a smaller footprint there. There were a number of additions that have been added over the years, and our concept is to take it back closer to what the original structure was like and remove a number of those additions. And then on the front of the site, right along Lewisburg, you can see the white dot there, the white square, and that is the proposed location of the Lee Buckner School. We have moved that back significantly from where it was before, up toward to the site, and trying to keep it out of the view shed of the more primary historic structures. Any questions about that so far? We've got more that we'll go into.
Can you indicate where the proposed school would be?
Yes.
School building?
It is in the lower left-hand corner. It's the white box there,
Yeah.
right along Lewisburg. Yep. And the next slide is the Winstead House. And it is, as you all know, a magnificent structure that we're really looking forward to working with you on. We think you'll be happy with a lot of what we've done. We don't plan on changing a lot, but we do plan on having some changes. This slide was in your packet, and it basically shows, and I've got a blow-up of the picture on the left, but on the right-hand side, it shows the original structure, and then the structures to be removed from the back of that. Next slide. This one is, yeah, back up a little bit. There you go. So this slide shows on the left-hand side of the slide, what you see is the original structure of the Winstead House. On the right-hand side in the goldenrod color are the additions that were done over the years. And the plan is to take those additions off, take it back to the original structure, original exterior walls, and restore that. Next slide. The floor plan is not envisioned to change significantly from what it is now. Very few changes. And to be able to use it as an art museum, the spaces work well for that now. And there'll be very few supporting spaces. We will have to put an additional fire stair in, as well as an elevator. The elevator we're planning on putting into the sleeping porch, the fire stair where there was a historic stair on the porch on the upper part of the slide. And so, but those will be both contained within the existing envelope. Next slide. This shows the front elevation of Winstead. Again, we'll talk about this more as we get into the COAs and other documents and reviews in the subsequent future. But basically, we're keeping the front almost exactly as it is, with very little change to that. We are planning on taking the door that goes into the mailroom between the old apartment and the main structure and using that as an entrance for people to be able to go into and out of to get to the front gardens. We'll also change the grade just slightly at that place so that it will be handicap accessible versus the steps that are currently there. But the front door, front porch, all that, be exactly as it is today. Okay. And this slide shows the back of the house. One of the things that we did was when we take off those, part of what we have are some steel stairs and fire stairs and things like that. As we take that off, we do have to deal with handicap and other considerations. And we studied other historic homes, especially things like Two Rivers, that are Italianate structures and homes built at a similar time and with a similar style. And what they had in most cases was a back porch that was in many cases a two-story back porch. And so we were planning on creating that type of structure on the back of the structure so that it can enable the ADA handicap access as well as a protected area for people to walk into the house from the visitor center. Next slide. So this is a site selection. We thought that this drawing would be helpful to be able to get a feel for the scale of the different structures. This to us is it's an important site section. The Winstead is on the left, the conservatory is on the right, the summer house is in the middle. The tree is actually to scale. We went out and had laser scanning of the entire site to be able to accurately depict everything that's there. So the tree is to scale, and as you can see, we want to keep everything out of the drip line of that tree and protect that tree as much as possible. And we are respecting the Winstead house and the height and the elevation of it. It will remain to be the tallest thing on the site. It is a two-story structure, the only two-story structure other than the Leahy Mansion. And so, and the other structures are one story and more modest in height and scale to that. Okay. And if we want to come back to this slide, we can certainly do that. The next slide shows the summer house. And the summer house is a simple structure that's designed for smaller gatherings. This shows 144 seats. That's still to be determined how we work out all that, but that's what this design shows. It will be connected to the Winstead house by a garden wall and an open-topped ramp that allows for service to the Winstead mansion. Okay. Next slide is the slide of the conservatory, and this shows the floor plan of the conservatory. Although it's not as salient to the discussion today, it was really designed to be a box within a box, and the outer box is really designed to be the greatest noise reduction and to be a well-detailed brick wall that faces the outside and the property lines of the site, but with no openings. And designed to make sure that no noise or light filters out into the neighborhood. All the openings are on the front facing the oak tree and Winstead to direct the activity out that way. And as it is with a box within a box, we have sound locks on it, similar to what we did to the theater, to be able to keep the sound inside and not outside the structure.
Mr. Stewart, can you clarify what the front and the back is from this floor plan, please?
Sure, be glad to. The top is the back, and it backs up against the drive that goes around the site. That drive is a fire code requirement to be able to fight fires from anywhere on the site. So the back of it is, and the south side is what you see at the top of the slide. And the front of it faces the back of the Winstead house, and it's on the lower part of the slide. And it has, you can see on the rendering there, it's the glass fronted. We'll use triple pane glass and really work to keep the sound within that structure and not let it filter outside.
Could we go back to the slide showing the height?
Sure.
Yeah, please,
Absolutely.
just for a second, thank you.
Speaking of, Mr. Stewart, can you clarify the height to the overall ridge of each of these buildings as opposed to just the eave line?
Sure, I'll be glad to. There's actually about a 6-foot difference in that site. It feels pretty flat, but it's a pretty long distance from the front to the back of the site. The Winstead house is almost 31 feet to the ridge of that, above the average grade around the structure. The conservatory around the average grade is 25 feet to the ridge of that. And then the eaves of that are 18 feet. So it's a much lower structure. And then right now, the top of the eave height of the conservatory is 20 feet 6 inches, and to the ridge is 33.2 to the actually very top of that structure. And again,
33?
33. Yes.
So, all right, 33 overall height to that, on that one.
Yes.
What's the summer house?
25.
And what's the Winstead?
30 feet 9 inches. Right.
I'm sorry.
30 feet 9 inches.
But you got to the, okay, 30 feet 9, all right, to the eave. The eave, the highest point on that house is how tall?
It's 30 feet 9 inches, but that's
Okay,
not
all
including
right,
the chimney.
okay,
That's to the
all right.
top of the roof.
So the
Okay.
34 is to the top of the chimneys?
That's, yeah, the numbers that you had before were really, we didn't as Amanda and I talked, she asked that we look at it from the average elevation around the structure. And so these numbers are from the average elevation. The other was a benchmark across the site, so.
And how far is the conservatory from the neighbor property line? I guess is how I want
Sure.
to say it. I think
It's about 50 feet from the property line.
50.
50.
And square footage of the conservatory,
Right now, it's 8,800 feet.
and square footage that you estimate, that will be once you remove the additions from Winstead House.
After removing the additions, it takes it down to 3614 square feet.
Thank you.
And
Say again, how many square feet in the conservatory?
It's 8,814,
88.
8814.
Okay.
And do you know the maximum occupancy number of that building? Yeah.
You know, it depends on how you count that. You know, the fire marshal looks at it as if you've got standing room only and everybody packed in like sardines. If you do that, we provided numbers to the neighbors as a result of their questions about that. And I forget the exact number, but I think it was like 800. It's you know, we'd never have that many people on site. And I know that your purview isn't use, but we are definitely having a lot of those conversations with the neighbors and with the city and the different departments.
Sure.
I want to go back to the height on the conservatory.
Yes.
What did you say that was to the top of the cupola, the highest point?
It's 33 feet 2 inches.
Okay, we'll go ahead and allow Mr. Stewart to proceed.
And then the next slide that we have is the carriage house. And you can see pictures on the slide on the left-hand side of the existing structure. Again, it's concrete block with a drive-it styrofoam and coating on the outside. What we plan to do is retain as much of the roof of that as we can, reclad it, probably with lap siding to really be more appropriate to what would be at this house at the time of these structures, and then to change some of the detailing on it. You've probably seen some of the prior images that were done of this that were much more ornate. That was our incredibly talented renderer, that Ben Johnson, that really looked at a very beautiful ornate structure. We think it's probably more appropriate to have it more simple and not quite as ornate as we had shown it there. So that's the design that you see at this point. So. And it will be used to house offices for the facility. We're trying to minimize and not have any offices in the Winstead house. Okay. And then the next slide that you see is of the Lee Buckner School, and you can see the photograph of it. That's the current condition, although we keep cutting back the saplings and the weeds, but they keep growing up around it. But that's the current condition. We had the lawn cut. And in the lower left-hand corner, you see one of the few pictures that we have of what it was originally. And we have a couple of those pictures, but nothing that shows what it was after 1940 when the addition was built. So on that floor plan, what you can see is the original structure on the left in the golden color, and in the white is the addition that was done in the 1940s. We are not planning on adding any square footage to this structure, making any modifications to the outside of it. What we do plan to do is to relocate it to the site, put a full tin roof across the entire site, a 5V roof that would have been appropriate for it. And as you can see, some of the siding is deteriorated. Some walls have actually had severe deterioration, and we will not be able to relocate all those walls. The original one-room schoolhouse is actually in pretty good shape because it was on piers. When they built the addition in the 1940s, they wanted to keep the floor levels the same, so they actually dug into the ground and put the wood right on the ground for the floor joist on the left. As you can imagine, since 1940, that hasn't survived. And so we'll salvage as much of that wood as possible, but match it with the same species and dimensions as we rebuild that structure. But our intent is to make it look exactly as it did in the 1940s. As far as the location of the schoolhouse, it is shown on the next slide. And when we came to you back in September, we asked for a location that's shown in the black outline with the white center. And we have moved it back approximately 80 feet to to bring it back up the site. And that was one of the comments that we heard at the DRC back at that point in time and from the commission. The location of that has been a really interesting journey, working with the different aspects of the city and the different elements, but we hope to find exactly the right location. If this is not it, we think we're getting close, but the other thing that I need to talk to you about with that is that right now it's about 110 feet from the front of that school to the road. So there was a big lawn in front of that school, and it wasn't a parking lot at that time. It was really more of a lawn in the 20s and 30s and 40s. And so we don't think it's appropriate for it to front on a street, especially an urban street. That would never have been the situation that it was in. We were also directed by the Rosenwall specifications that were very specific that this building orient toward the north with the front door facing north. That's the orientation it currently has on the site. And so what we're proposing is that we orient it to the north, which is what you see here in the goldenrod. That opens it out not onto any street, but onto what we'd create as a lawn that would be in front of this, so that there'd be a journey that people would take to get to this Rosenwall School, and then a lawn that would be in front of it to try to give it better perspective. We've even talked about on the inside, taking the windows and putting a film on the windows, so when you're inside looking out, that you're actually able to see what you would have seen back in the 30s rather than what you see today. And so we'd really like to get that as a context where people really feel the experience of what that school would have been like.
Mr. Stewart, just to clarify for everyone, when you say north facing, your intent is that the front of the building would be this side facing toward the intersection,
And
correct?
it's represented in this,
It is, right, there's a
and I think
there's a rendering.
that's an upcoming slide. I
It
think.
is, you're right, yeah. And it shows it much better than I can describe it, that's for sure, so. Okay, and then the slide that you see here shows exactly that condition. And so you can see that the Winstead House is the upper left-hand corner. This image was taken as if you're in a hot air balloon over Margin Street. You can see Lewisburg on the upper right-hand corner. And this shows the location of the school with a lawn in front of it. That would be an activity area for school children, for the Heritage program, Heritage Classroom program, and other elements. The other thing that was in the documentation that we found from the research, extensive research done on the school, was a description of the school being in a cedar glade. And so what we're proposing to do is the front of the school would not have had much in the way of landscaping. That's what you see in this drawing. But we are proposing to recreate that cedar glade behind that school that would provide separation from Lewisburg and from the entrance to the site and the rest of the site. And that's the rest of the slides. There's some additional supplemental information that was in your earlier packets, but this is what we thought would be best to present today so that we have discussion about all this.
Thank you. Let me ask you a question. Go back to this section through. There appears to be a pretty tall brick wall or a wall behind there. Is that, I don't think that exists now, right?
That's correct. It does not exist now.
So what is the thought on that? Will it be, how big?
So the purpose of that wall would be to contain any activity within that garden so that it's not disruptive to the neighbors from a visual standpoint, and so that it helps to keep the noise, any conversations or other noise contained. It's designed to be a brick wall that would be 8 feet tall.
8 feet.
And probably with some lattice openings at the top.
And it'll run from Margin all the way back?
No, sir. It'll run from Winstead around the site and then back into Winstead. So it just contains that oak garden. And,
Okay.
I think that might need some clarification, so I'm going to go to a site plan. Well, see if I can find a better one. Okay, can you clarify here?
Sure. So on that slide that you see, you can see where the oak tree is. And so one of the walls runs along inside the parking, right above that. Amanda, if you can come down further. No. So the oak garden is right around that oak tree. And there is a wall that runs from the summer house back to the conservatory, right there. So that's one segment of the wall. And then the other segment of the wall comes off the other corner of the conservatory. And up just a hair there. Right there, and just go just a little bit further up. So it runs from there to Winstead. So those two brick walls are well inside the site.
All right, but my question was, is there a wall from where your drive on the top part of the screen there? Does it run all along that property line or just from the Winstead house back?
There's an existing, it's at least 8 feet tall, a wood fence.
Wood fence, okay.
And we are planning on replicating that. You know, it's not in good condition.
Okay,
what we'd like to-
but is it wood or brick or?
It's wood.
Okay, and that's what you're going back with?
That's what we're proposing to go back with.
Okay.
And,
all right.
and we will make that a robust fence so that headlights and things like that won't go through that fence.
Okay.
Okay, is it appropriate now for staff to speak?
Yeah,
Great, thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll keep my comments brief. I know we're a little short on time. We'd like to get through in about 20 minutes. Introduce myself to everyone. My name's Amanda Rose. I'm the Preservation Planner with the Planning Department, and I liaise the Historic Zoning Commission. So to reiterate Chair Roberts' comments earlier, my role is to advise based on items that are entitled as part of a development plan process. That means that the Historic Zoning Commission is providing a recommendation to the Planning Commission and to the Board of Mayor and Aldermen on things that the design guidelines for the historic districts cover that would also be covered by a development plan approval. So we won't be talking about the architectural styles of buildings today because we do consider that later for what we call approval through a certificate of appropriateness application. That's the normal type of application that the Historic Zoning Commission considers on a monthly basis. What we're looking at today are things that would affect a development plan, which would be buildings, locations, their heights, the scale, meaning how many stories they are, and the massing or footprint of a building in relation to other buildings, to buildings on nearby properties, to each other, and also looking at new parking and driveway locations because those are all covered by our design guidelines. So I am going to primarily use this, but also go to a couple of different slides that Mr. Stewart has provided, which has been very helpful. Thank you. Before I do that, I do want to commend the Heritage Foundation. They're doing a service to the community by trying to restore this Winstead house to its former glory. This is a very important National Register listed historic house, and it's needed some love for a long time. So we really do appreciate their interest in doing the right thing for this home. So in speaking about the whole property, this is a unique context. What we do when we look at buildings is we interpret based on, commercial, residential type forms, and we need to relate it to the context, meaning the specific site itself as well as what's around it. This has been a campus for 40 years, and so it is important to think of it in that way, but it's also within a residential neighborhood, residential context. So that I can appreciate the challenges of this property and what the applicant has brought forward has taken a very long time and a lot of consideration. So we understand that has been a tough one, and we thank you for considering those things. My comments will be from a planning perspective for the residential context, and then thinking of it holistically as a campus type site. The Winstead House is being proposed to have some partial demolition of non-historic elements and to have some, a second floor porch added to the rear for accommodating of egress. That is not something I plan on covering so much today because it will be covered as part of a certificate of appropriateness application. In fact, the applicant could come in now and do that if they so desired, but it is part of their overall context, and I wanted to bring that to your attention. Why I did want that to be addressed to some degree today is because the footprint of the Winstead House matters in relation to what's being proposed on the rest of the site. So all your comments and questions as we went through the presentation about the size and the height are all very important. The proposed square footage of this building in relation to some of the others on the site is a little concerning. We do want to consider the historic properties on the site, which would be this Winstead House, what I know is the Farrah Fleming House, which is number 9 here, and also the Smokehouse, which is not in its original location, mind you. But those are the 3 historic buildings on the site. There's also a building that is historic that's being proposed to be relocated to the site, which is also very important. The others should be of secondary importance in both scale, massing, height, and architectural features as part of the context of the property. So it is recommended that that building number one be, the size is concerning. Not necessarily the scale, 1.5-story scale is entirely appropriate. I think it's a 1-story as the appearance of a 1.5, but it does seem to be much more sizable than the historic buildings on the site. I would very much encourage some 3D modeling that could show how this is viewed from different vantage points on the site so that the staff and the Historic Zoning Commission can be more comfortable in knowing how, the proposed size of this building relates to those around it, how it would be viewed from public view sheds, as well as from neighboring properties. There are residential homes surrounding all sites here. As far as moving on to the next building, which would be the summer house, I don't have a lot of comments. I do want to note that it is more modest in size than that around it. I do want to see detailing that is more, that's inspired by the Italianate style of the home, but is more simple. We'll look at that later. I think the location is appropriate. The conservatory, stylistically, that's something we'll look at later, but as I mentioned, I do have some concerns about the footprint and visibility and impact based on that size. Moving on to building number 10, which is the existing building, known to most as the pavilion. That is largely going to be refaced as proposed by the applicant, so we'll look at that later. It's not proposed to be relocated to any portion of the site. Is really a matter of discussion at a later date. The smokehouse, number 11, is proposed to be relocated here from what is currently at the back of the Winstead House, probably around here or so. The smokehouse is not original to that site where it's currently located. I've done some research previously in doing Sanborn mapping. I agree with the assessment that it's at least 1913, if not a little earlier. I can't find any evidence of it earlier. All that to say, it is a historic structure, and relocation could be appropriate if it's the only way to save the building. And I do have some reservations about where it's being placed. I do think it's put in a lesser prominent location. We don't want the new buildings to impact view sheds of historic structures. As for building 9, it is a existing historic building. I have worked on some, some plans that have come forward for interior renovation, and there's really not a lot to comment here as far as the building's concerned. Moving on to the Rosenwald School. The proposed Rosenwald School is a historic structure, and there's a lot of merit to saving that structure and putting it somewhere where it has some TLC and some prominence to the public eye. I believe that it's within, it's more appropriately placed here as it was proposed earlier renditions to the Historic Zoning Commission, further closer to the intersection. I would defer to historic precedent as to where the building should face. I have understood, and I definitely may be wrong on this, that Rosenwald schools were historically orientated toward the north-facing or south-facing. So I'd love some input from our research historians and commissioners on that may have some background on that. But my understanding is it could be north or south-facing. They've chosen north-facing, which faces toward North Margin. They do need a variance in order to do that from the Board of Zoning Appeals because it doesn't currently meet zoning. I do think there is some merit to placing it the way it would have been historically. So I would expect that the DRC provides some comment to that for the applicant today. I do think that the alterations that are proposed can be handled at a later date, but it is very helpful to understand what the intention is and to ensure that any sort of alterations to this structure would have sensitivity to the site and setting, whereas where the ADA accessibility would be, or any HVAC or mechanical placement, because this location has high prominence on all sides the way it's orientated. And moving on to the parking and driving. aisles. Parking is recommended by our design guidelines to be placed behind buildings and screened. Because of that, this parking location could not be supported by our design guidelines. It is at the street level. There may be some screening. I would encourage the applicant to comment a little bit more on that. But the intent is to have historic structures or other structures forward of the parking and the parking be behind. Having the drive aisle here, I think, it's important for the Historic Zoning Commission to comment on this. I think the intent here is to place it near where the existing curb cut is. It is slightly different than the existing. But the important thing is, and we would have to defer to others on this, is what would be safe from a traffic perspective and from a site clear zone perspective. So I would love to hear more about that from my colleagues in our engineering and streets teams at a later date. But as far as moving into the site, I do think this is fairly wide. I'd love to get comments on the width and how we could lessen the impact of hardscapes on the overall property. I do have some strong reservations about how much hardscapes being put around this historic structure here. It's proposed to be hardscaped on all sides at this point, all sides. And that's just contrary to the context of that historic building. It's just not appropriate. And I think there are ways that we could adjust that to make it more historically appropriate. I do have reservations about the closeness of the roundabout to the Winstead Mansion. I would like to see if there is an opportunity to address this so that it doesn't come so closely to the existing or historic buildings. Further, everything back here as far as parking concerns, parking at the rear is appropriate. There is parking proposed forward of the existing Winstead house, and that could not be supported by guidelines. It would be recommended that it be highly screened and ideally just not be placed there. As far as the fencing and walls, I just wanted to clarify based on Mr. Stewart's comments that there's an existing fence located along the property line. It's the applicant's intent to replace the existing fence with a similar fence that would, in appearance, and that I believe is taller than 6 feet. The walls would be limited to the garden here. My last comment is about this section here, which we really didn't talk about that much during the presentation. It's called the Secret Garden. I'm going to go to a different slide. Cyril, what's the best slide for that? Okay, right here. Okay. So this is a proposed area within the middle of the site between the Rosenwald School and the Winstead House. It has 8-foot tall brick walls around it. It is unique. It's not necessarily something you would see in a residential context, so I would like to see some renderings that would show how that would look in relation to the existing historic structures from different vantage points, especially this intersection, because it's not typical to have walls in yards of this nature. Most of the walls that we see in residential contexts are perimeter, and this is more interior to the site. It's a very specific purpose. It is also much taller than we would recommend typically for a perimeter fence. Fencing in front yards is recommended to be no more than 3 feet in height. When I say fencing, that includes walls as well. Walls are recommended to be no more than 7 feet in residential areas and rear yards. And this is proposed at 8 feet. So I would like more information on that. And I'm happy to answer any questions the commission members may have. Thank you.
Okay, Commissioners, we've got about 5 to 6 minutes. So let's just start with questions.
We can do the
Susan, you wa-
3:55 if we need to.
Okay, we'll say 10. Susan, you want to start questions?
Okay, I'll start. I'm going to address the Rosenwald School first. I have Mary Hofswelly's book on rebuilding the rural southern community, and she covers, she has a really nice chapter on this, but there's a plan called the one-teacher community school plan that's is to face north or south only. Excuse me. And the whole idea with Rosenwald School was to bring daylight into these rooms. And so when you did that, the windows would be on the east and the west side. So that's really kind of the crux of it.
And
then-
Dr. Hofschwelle is a premier historian on Rosenwald Schools, correct?
Correct. That is correct. And then my concern about I am also concerned about the amount of paving and parking around the Farrah Fleming building, which is what I tend to think of. I've taught in just about every building on the Ormore campus. But at any rate, that really concerns me. And then the footprint of the event center is, I think, really overshadows the Winstead House, which I think is, to me, is kind of the premier building on that site. That is one of my major concerns. And I think the Rosenwald School, I mean, this is honestly the hardest part, I think, with this particular project. I think that we have to honor, the African American community, but I think that it's possible. I think we're not quite there yet with the siting of it. I'd like to see it maybe pull it in, more into the site, towards the Winstead House. So that's my comments. Thank you.
Okay, Josh?
No comments.
Okay, Brian?
I share the concerns of Ms. Rose and of Ms. Besser. So I'm going to bring my comments mainly to the historic landscape. So since the house is what we're really focused on. And my question with the landscaping, will there be a great reworking and terracing of that front lawn?
The front lawn's really, there's a pretty good grade differential there now. We do have to make everything ADA accessible, so we are planning on an ADA walk that goes through there. We're going to work as much as possible with the existing grades to be able to accommodate that, and we'd like to pull out a lot of this as more of a gravel pathway versus paving versus hardscape. Gravel's much more appropriate to what would have been there before. So,
But the intent of my question has to do with the slope. So currently, it's a pretty gradual slope to South Margin. And I'm wondering, are you going to be able to maintain that slope with the waterworks that we see in the grotto, or will it terrace down? And what will happen to the current magnolia trees that are there and other landscape features?
yeah, that's one of the things that we're working on is making sure that we can keep as many of those trees in the front yard. They were designed symmetrically around there, so that's what we're doing, and we've got a planning plan that does that. But it does require, to be able to get the ADA walk in, it does require some terracing, but we're going to try to keep as much as possible the way it is today and disturb those trees as little as possible.
And my final comment would just go to the guidelines, which says that you should retain as much of the fabric of the historic landscape and character as possible.
Nick?
My main concern is the massing of the conservatory. It does appear to be large. And then my second biggest concern is also the amount of asphalt and parking, particularly on the fronting Lewisburg. Driving by there today, I know we really enjoy seeing the greenscape, and that looks like it would really detract from that. So I probably don't have anything else new to add than what's been said, but that's my biggest two thoughts.
Kathy?
I don't have any comments other than what's been said so far, but I'll work on it.
Mary?
My comment would be, for what's pertinent tonight, would be the size of the conservatory and the hardscape, just those two things combined, and the hardscape around the Berry House. And then every time I look at the Rosenwald School, I like the location where it is better now, but every time I look at it when it was as built and knowing that the addition's gonna have to be rebuilt, I always go, oh my gosh, do you just build what leave what is intact that you can move? As it was originally built as a Rosenwald School. because I think it tells the story just as well that way as with the addition, in my opinion, because you're having to rebuild the addition.
Lisa?
So, my concerns are the mass and scale and height of the conservatory, as well as the hardscape, the quantity of the hardscape. But more importantly, the conservatory, as we look at these pictures, it steals the show. And our business here is to give homage to the historic buildings. In this plan or proposal, I don't think that's being accomplished.
Well, several comments. I'll try to just, let me touch on one thing we haven't talked about. I agree with other comments on the mass and the scale and the height of buildings. I'm seeing the entrance off of Lewisburg and a traffic flow. You've got several property uses. You've got an art museum, an entrepreneur center, the gardens, the Rosenwald School, the conservatory, the summer house, the carriage house. That's a lot of stuff. And I don't know whether people will be able to just, if I can just drive in there and circle around, or whether there's going to be a security checkpoint. So how's that handled? Is there a security checkpoint that we don't have noted on these drawings that'll stop traffic?
We have talked about that, and the only location we would think for a security checkpoint would be immediately after the roundabout.
Yeah.
So there'd be plenty of room for cars. Cars wouldn't stack up on the outside of the street because of a gate or something.
And we don't need any
having to go
more of
through
that.
some of
That's another topic.
Sure.
Not related to this, but this, okay, so that's a possibility that may have to come. The other things, I guess, the parking, clarify how much parking you have on the site now for the plan.
So our traffic engineers recommended 90 spaces, and that's what's shown on the site now is 90 spaces.
Okay,
It's the same number that was on there for O'More.
okay. Okay, so that's it. You've dealt with the fence. Some other things will be clarified when we are on site, I am sure.
Right.
But does anybody have anything else?
Well, the only thing I think I meant to say is we're thrilled to death that these houses are being saved. I was up there for a year, and I think I invited Cyril up
that's
there
right. Yep.
to see. They have been in a deteriorated condition for quite some time, so I'm certainly thankful about that.
If I could just say
Yeah.
one additional, as we, moving forward, as we gain more information about what's proposed, I also think it's important for us to understand the age of the addition to the Winstead Mansion. What is the age of that? That the proposed removal of all of that is quite substantial. And so, because a history of a building can be acquired even through just a 50-year period of time, we should know what the history of that addition is.
Sure. We'll get that for you.
Sarah, one other thing. I think, looking ahead to, let's say, November, I think it's going to be very important that we have some 3D representation from all angles surrounding this property of what the impact would be to the neighborhoods.
Sure.
And that means Berry Circle, Lewisburg, South Margin, Fourth Avenue, from all angles.
Sure.
So that's, because this looks neat, but that doesn't tell the whole story.
Sure. And fortunately, we have digitized the entire site, landscaping, and
That's
and so we'll
fine.
be
I'm
able
just,
to
I'm
put
just,
all it together.
I'm looking ahead.
All right. And I'm hoping we'll have that by the next meeting, is what I'm thinking we'll have.
Okay.
So.
The one thing that I can think of that's got kind of a similar situation as far as the neighborhood goes is when they added the Sallyport downtown, and the owners of Lily Bells, which was, back, a property backing up to it. And they were very adamant about having a brick wall on that property line because of concern of merging a entertainment venue, against a service venue. So might want to look at that.
Sure.
Okay, is there anything else Susan, one other question.
I just wanted to reinforce Mary's comment about the Rosenwald School, that it seems that if we kept the part that is still intact and move that to the site, that seems to me that really will tell the beginning of the story. And you can show it in the true north-south, and you'll have the windows on either side, and you'll have, I think, in my mind, it'll be a better option. Thank you.
Yeah, and I know we're almost out of time. We'll look at that in more detail. The idea was to keep the original one-room schoolhouse in the original condition, no bathrooms, furnish it appropriately, and to use the addition for the required ADA toilet and for any mechanical systems and interpretive space. But we'll continue to look at that.
And Mr. Chair, maybe a way to do that is, I'm trying to say, just have a new addition that looks like that footprint. But I think telling a story that we're moving both things doesn't seem as authentic as that we can move this one building. It is movable. So,
All right, Kathy.
The Liberty Tree, the big oak tree, it feels very hemmed in by the new conservatory and the surrounding implements, the wall and things like that. So that's a real impact to the site.
All right, thanks. I think that's it then. Amanda, you got anything else?
Yes, I do want to remind everyone, we do have a scheduled special DRC site visit on this property in October. That date I will look up right now. It will be October the 18th at 3 o'clock. We will have to be very focused because we will have our regular 4 o'clock meeting here at City Hall. So we'll get everyone out by 3:45. What we will focus on are, understanding the site setting considerations in relation to what you're seeing on the screen right now. I will encourage the applicant to provide more information by that time for topography. It seems to be a very valid question that's come up this evening. Also, I do believe that building off of this slide that was already provided, showing a section through the site will be very helpful, mainly in showing the grade changes. And so we can understand, because we understand this is more of an average, we'd like to see the way that we measure, which is from the intended grade to the top of the building, understanding how these buildings relate to each other, and that way we can make the considerations
It would be helpful, I
necessary.
think, if you sent an email out to the commission just saying what you just got through saying. And
Absolutely.
probably Copy Cyril as well.
Well, we have a
won't remember.
captive audience.
I won't remember that.
So I wanted to make sure I reminded everybody of that. So again, thank you all so much for taking special time out of your day. This is not a normal meeting. I know it means a lot to the applicant. It certainly means a lot to the community and to staff that you were able to do that today.
Okay.
We'll move on to our 4 o'clock.
We're adjourned.
Thank you.
Thank you.
are we going to have a